The original Fire Emblem released to both critical and commercial success and was the best-selling game in the series until Awakening, so it's no real surprise that the next entry in the series would also receive a worldwide release. But to the surprise of many Western fans, this next game would not continue the story of the previous Fire Emblem. Instead, this story takes place on a different continent and features a brand new cast of characters. Most fans at the time were expecting the game to feature Roy, the character featured in Super Smash Bros. Melee and the son of Fire Emblem's main protagonist. I still remember being in absolute and total shock when Sacred Stones released and Roy was nowhere to be found within the game, mainly due to how the ending of Fire Emblem clearly had some loose plot threads. The truth of the matter is that the Fire Emblem game that featured Roy was actually the 6th game of the series and a Japanese-only release. The Fire Emblem that we in the West received was the 7th game of the series and a prequel to Roy's adventure. Many of the Fire Emblem games tell their stories in the same settings across the span of 2 or 3 games, like the aforementioned games with Roy and his father Eliwood. The Sacred Stones is unique in that it is the only game in the entire series that has a standalone story, with no other games in the series sharing its setting or characters. Now with all that rambling out of the way, let's get on with the review of 2005's Game Boy Advance release of the 8th game of the series and the 2nd game of the series to receive a localization, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. The Sacred Stones is set on the continent of Megville, a land ruled by 5 different nations, each with their own sacred stone, a holy object that has the power to dispel evil. These stones were crucial to winning the ancient war against the Demon King. Each of the capital kingdoms are named after one of the 5 heroes of the war and have their corresponding stone to this day. Centuries pass, and this is where the game's story begins, with the Empire of Grado instigating a war against all the other countries for reasons unknown. The game centers around the stories of the twins Ephraim and Erica, the prince and princess of Renee, which is a kingdom that follows within the first 5 minutes of the game. The main intrigue of the plot is to discover why Grado began its invasion, what happened to the twins' friend, the Imperial Prince Lion, and the reason behind the appearance of monsters across the lands. Initially, players follow Erica on her mission to find her brother after the invasion. These 8 chapters of the game are similar to Lynn's story in that it serves as the tutorial section of the game, although unlike Lynn's story, the tutorials are handled much better. After this section, players will have the option of following Erica on her journey to Roston or Ephraim on his mission to conquer the imperial capital of Grado. Depending on which of the twins you decide to follow, you'll experience a different set of levels for the next 6 or something odd chapters until they reunite around chapter 15. Suffice to say, if you want to see the full story, you will need to play through the game twice. The game is only 20 chapters long, making it a slightly shorter game than the previous Fire Emblem. This is largely due to the lack of side quests or guidance chapters, which is a disappointing omission. Overall, while the story is good, it's nowhere near as compelling or as well told as the previous game, and the same can be said for the game at large. Luckily, the game's cast of characters more than make up for the lack of a substantially epic story. Like the last Fire Emblem, Sacred Stones has a very well developed cast of characters for you to hopefully successfully navigate through the game's various chapters, and like before, support conversations return, with all the interesting character development and intriguing dialogue that they brought previously. While that's all fine and dandy, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones doesn't have that big of a cast of characters. In fact, this game's cast is noticeably smaller than the previous game. Noticing a reoccurring theme here? But despite all of this, I do feel that The Sacred Stones offers a very interesting, while somewhat generic story, with another well-developed and likable group of characters. Interestingly enough, I would argue that this game is one of the best developed villains out of the entire series, but I wouldn't want to spoil that here. Mechanically and gameplay-wise, The Sacred Stones is pretty much exactly the same as Fire Emblem Rekka no Ken. Systems like the weapons triangle, the magic triangle, and well, pretty much everything make a return. So those familiar with the series may be disappointed that there isn't really anything substantially new here gameplay-wise. The most notable differences, aside from the branching narrative, is the world map, which allows you to choose your destination in a linear manner following the story until later in the game when you can choose your destination freely. I do like the ability to go revisit towns again in order to buy items and resupply my troops whenever I wish, and I do like the idea of fighting enemies on the map for additional experience. But this leads up to the Sacred Stone's biggest flaw, how exploitable the world map really is. Since the player has the ability to encounter monsters on the world map and can engage in skirmishes with them for easy experience, it can very easily lead up to your units becoming vastly more powerful than all of your enemies upon abuse, making the game a cakewalk. Dungeon locations like the Tower of Vadi offer even easier experience to be grinded, and this leads up to the game lacking any real challenge. Even without the ability to grind, I'd still say that this game is definitely less difficult than the other games of the series, with even hard mode not being much more different than the standard difficulty setting. The Sacred Stones is not the first game of the series to include these sort of mechanics, as the Japanese exclusive Fire Emblem Gaiden, the second game of the series, also had a world map and monsters for players to fight. Another mechanic that existed in previous Japanese-only games that the Sacred Stones brought back is the skill system. Each promoted unit has a unique skill that has a chance of occurring in battle, like for instance snipers receiving a 100% chance of hitting, or generals being able to nullify all damage. This skill system doesn't really add much more depth to the gameplay, but it's still a neat little addition. The one system that is unique to this game, however, is the branching promotion as well as the trainee units. Promotion is handled exactly the same way it has in the previous game, the main difference being that upon promotion you can choose between two classes to promote to. This branching promotion system is kinda neat, but again doesn't really add much more to the overall formula. On the other hand, trainee units are unique units that start off initially incredibly weak, but they can promote twice. The first time upon reaching level 10, they can promote to one of the normal basic units, then again normally, and upon clearing both Erika and Ephraim's routes, each of the 3 trainee units can unlock a super version of their starting class. Now, before I can finish talking about the gameplay, I absolutely must mention the post-game content, the Creature Campaign. After you complete all the game's chapters, you can freely roam the map and explore the game's dungeons in their entirety, the Tower of Vadi and the Lagdo Ruins. Upon completing a certain amount of floors within these dungeons, you can unlock boss characters as playable units, including the main villain, if you can clear the Lagdo Ruins 3 times. Do so at your own discretion. Overall, even including the post-game content, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones just feels unsubstantial. While not necessarily a bad thing, the game is standing on the shoulders of the previous games and brings very little of its own in terms of gameplay. I would still say that The Sacred Stones is a very fun turn-based strategy game and one that is very welcoming to replay, but it's just not as good as the Fire Emblem game that came before it and the one that would precede it. The Sacred Stones also reuses a lot of the graphics and visuals of the previous game. Aside from the monsters, a few new unit types, and the character portraits, practically every visual asset in this game is taken from Fire Emblem. But Fire Emblem did introduce a very appealing visual style, and the fluid battle animations are still a joy to watch, so I can't condemn Intelligent Systems for recycling their existing assets, especially since Fire Emblem is still one of the best looking games for the Game Boy Advance. Once again, both the soundtrack and the sound effects sound great, although unlike the rest of the game, the majority of the songs used are original pieces, with some remixes from older games. Overall, I'm very pleased to say that Sacred Stones has a soundtrack that can measure up to the previous games. In the end, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones feels more like a side story or spin-off title than a mainline Fire Emblem title. It did suffer from being made at the same time as the next mainline Fire Emblem game, Path of Radiance for the GameCube. The Sacred Stones begun development after Path of Radiance did, and even released a year before it. Does that make The Sacred Stones a poor game? No, not by any means. The Sacred Stones is still worth picking up. Although it's not the biggest or necessarily the best game in the series, it's still a lot of fun, and the short length does make the game very welcoming to replay. An average playthrough should take around 20 hours, although my record is 6, but I have played this game at least a dozen times. So despite the fact that The Sacred Stones feels more like an annualized sequel than a full-fledged one, it's still a great strategy RPG and one that you should definitely track down. Well, that's all for part 2. Join me in the next part as I'll be looking at Fire Emblem's glorious return to home consoles with my review of Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. As always, this has been Darren of the Gaming Pilgrimage. Till next time. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the past few videos. I've been trying to put as much time and effort as required to make these videos the best quality they can be. So if you like the video, please by all means like and share with your friends, as it really helps out the channel a lot. And if you want to see what's going on at the channel, you can always subscribe. Or if you're curious to see what I'm up to or what the channel's going to be doing in the future, follow me on Twitter and make suggestions there. And hopefully you look forward to the next part of the Fire Emblem retrospective. And if you want to go back to part 1, you can click on that right here. Anyways, thanks again for watching. Darren out.